Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. You are watching and listening to the Spiritual Exercises. I'm Rachel Amadei. I am so excited to bring you guys a really special guest today and someone who I've known since we were like little children. We played together. Our moms were best friends, and it just so happens that she has just kind of an incredible resume of research and education in the areas of health and wellness that I've been trying to discuss with you all now for a little while. Her name is Ashlie Elizabeth, and she has a master's in counseling. She also is going to be starting a ministry called Exalt Family Ministries. She's working on setting this up. This is going to be resources and advocacy in the health realm, which I think we really need. We really need more options. We really need more wisdom in that and more people speaking into that for us. So I'm excited. Thank you, Ashlie, for being here.
Of course. Thank you for
It's
having me.
so fun. I don't get to catch up with you very often. But seriously, like I feel like I've known your face and you look the same as you did when you were young.
Oh
I've
gosh.
known your face for so long, and your family, and you have such an incredible family, such an incredible testimony, so many godly people in your family. And so I think it's not at all surprising that God puts you into the health realm in one way, shape, or form given the times that we're in.
Mm,
And I think God is calling more and more people to discuss this because we have been learning so much about what's happened to our medical establishment in the last few years. And people seem to be kind of off. They don't seem to be healthy mentally, psychologically, spiritually, physically, just not healthy. So
mm.
we're going to have a good discussion today. But I want to start with the viewers and listeners. I think they'd really just like to know more about who you are, the ministry you're working on, and your story. How did you get to this place? What brought you here?
Oh, well, it's a long story, but I'll try to make it quick. So I'm a Colorado native, and um, we I'm the oldest of four in my family. So I'm a bit of a type A personality, like take charge. Yeah, right. That's why we get along.
Right.
only firstborns understand
That's
firstborns.
right. We understand each other.
Uh, but I went to school at CU. I played soccer, um, and it was really interesting. I was thinking about this, like, wow, I soccer was like growing up, like my identity. And when I was done with my undergrad and soccer was over, I was like, what am I supposed to do with myself?
Mm,
My parents would joke that I had like a year or so of like just finding myself.
yeah.
And I worked at Bubba Gump Shrimp Company with a
Oh,
friend.
yeah. I remember that place.
Oh yeah, downtown Denver. It was not my finest moment. Because I wasn't even a waitress. I was a hostess because I had never worked in the restaurant business. So I had no idea what I was doing. But within like that year or so of just like figured out like what is my life going to look like in my future. And I decided to go back to school. I went to CU Denver and got a master's in counseling because I always had a heart for helping others.
Mm,
And I really wanted to work with kids. My undergrad was in speech pathology,
mm.
but that just wasn't quite fitting where I wanted to go. So I did my master's in counseling. I absolutely loved it. It was their program there is amazing. It's like took me about 2.5, 3 years because it's a pretty intense program. I got
Mm.
to do a practicum in a elementary school in Thornton, which was oh my gosh, so eye opening and just
Yeah.
like how different worlds are just in within our state and like the things that these young kids were going through, like sixth graders,
Yeah.
it was crazy. And I did some work in a high school as well. And then just really realized like, wow, if I work in a school, I don't really get the chance to work with kids and like on mental health. It was more counselors these days in schools are more geared towards like scheduling and let's see what you want to do with college. Like there's a little bit of mental health talk. You know, we talked about like bullying and things like that. But it wasn't like getting into the weeds and really being an
Right.
advocate for kids. And that's kind of where my heart was. And so I didn't actually like go into it as a career, even though I have my master's in that. I ended up working totally separate in oil and gas because I had just like had a friend that got me into it while I was doing school and it worked. And
Right.
so I did that for about 10 years and then had, got married. I now have 4 kids that are 7, 5, 3, and 1. I have
Mhm.
3 boys, and then our little last one was a girl, and she's just been so fun this
Oh,
last
yeah.
year. But I think becoming a mother also has really like it jumpstarts you into like, oh my goodness, who's in charge of our family and their
Mhm.
health? And I felt personally like it weighed on me and
Mm.
as their parent and their mother. And it was really important to me to just be able to, not only for myself to know, but for them to be able to teach them the importance of taking care of yourself and that our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit and we're
Yeah.
called to, treat it like a temple. And I think in America, at least, we don't really look at it that way. We're kind of think we're invincible. Like we have everything, everything's fine here, it's safe. We kind of outsource our health to others,
Mhm.
and we don't take responsibility for it. And
Right.
so, yeah, I think too, a bigger part of my story that really has shaped me into like becoming more of a researcher is about gosh now is it 4 years I don't like
Yeah.
counting these years because my dad, so 5 years ago on Father's Day weekend, drove himself to the hospital, didn't tell any of us. He had been having some weird symptoms, and we came to find out he drove himself to a hospital, St. Joe's downtown, and because he thought he was having a stroke.
Mm.
Not ideal if you're having a stroke to be driving yourself. But
No.
he went in. They didn't think he did, but my grandma, his mother, had several strokes and died from a stroke / heart attack. And so I think that was just always in the back of his head. Like I have family history of this. So they
Yeah.
kind of appeased him. Were like, well, you're not showing signs of a stroke, but like we'll do a CT just to double check. And the call that we all got, my mom, my sister, my brother, and I, brothers, and I, the next call was that they found a mass in his brain,
Mm.
and we needed to immediately go to the hospital. So the whirlwind of that was he ended up being diagnosed with a glioblastoma, which is a very stage 4, immediate, grade 4, very aggressive cancer in his brain. He was only 56 when he was diagnosed, so very,
Yeah.
very young, and not a lot of symptoms or signs that like would have said, "Oh, I think you have a brain tumor." Like it was very subtle that really only he noticed, but thank God he went and got checked.
Right.
But none of us knew. Like we didn't know he was having like symptoms of something, and so it was a complete
It's
shock.
shocking.
Oh, complete shock. Like
Yeah.
your dad. We're really all our family's really close, and um, my dad is like he was our rock. Like we used
Yeah.
to joke he was the godfather of the family. Like what he said went, like you didn't cross dad. Um, but in the most loving way. Like he just like took
Oh,
care of us all.
yeah,
Oh
he
yeah.
was awesome. I remember
Yep.
him very well. He's a great man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he, throughout that, his diagnosis, he went through chemo and radiation. Um, but I was kind of me and my sister Brittany, we ended up just like diving into research and we were like, we're going to figure this out. And we want to like help him as much as possible because I think that was just our heart. Like our dad did everything for us. And so this
Right.
was like the smallest thing we could do was to
Yeah.
be there and help him and just like walk alongside him in this and my mom. Um, Long story short, he only made it about 13 months before he passed away, which is, I mean, they give you 12 to 18. So 13 was just right in there. And we were really praying and believing in God for a miracle, but we also knew like it's God's will. And we were really trying to align with that. But in the same sense of like, we don't believe we're just going to sit back and wait. Like God gave us brains, He gave us
Yeah.
resources, He gave us, so much that we personally felt we needed to be active participants in His health and treatment plan, as well as like our family as a whole. So,
Mm.
and I think as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking, one of the things that really I think spurred us on, all of us, my brothers included, was my dad's first meeting with his oncologist. Was literally 2 days after he had brain surgery. So he got diagnosed the Friday of Father's Day weekend, had brain surgery that Monday. And then 2 days later, he was out of ICU, um, with a huge cut in his head, and just kind of processing. At that point, we hadn't really, well, we knew the diagnosis, but he didn't.
Right.
So they had told us the diagnosis, but we were meeting with his oncologist for the very first time. He's like on steroids, just got out of ICU. And the oncologist walks in and tells us what the diagnosis is, or tells him mostly. And we're all in there with him. And then she hands him a piece of paper that is a Google printout of what a glioblastoma is. And I'm kind of like, oh, Google? We're Googling things? Like,
You're
what's
an
happening?
oncologist. This
Yeah.
should be way more official
Yeah.
than
I was like, I
this.
thought we didn't
Yeah.
Google things. But sorry, my voice is, I'm just coming off of like a laryngitis thing. So if I squeak,
Okay.
I apologize.
No
Um,
problem.
but and in the midst of her talking and explaining to him, and he's just shocked, obviously,
Right.
he's trying to process, but he just had brain surgery, so he's a little slow to like figure this all out. And she looks at him, and I'm asking questions. We're kind of all asking about like what's the treatment plan, and
So wait, so I want to get the timeline straight. So he goes in and they just admitted him to the hospital
oh
then? Is that
yeah,
what happened?
oh
And
yeah,
then they operated on the cancer within a few days,
yes.
and he still didn't know at that
Well,
point?
no. So they knew he had a mass, but they didn't know if it was cancer. It could have been benign. They just,
Okay.
so until they go in, and the reason they would have done it sooner because it was such a large mass, but it was the weekend, and so to get a surgery team together, like a brain surgery team, it's
Right.
pretty intense.
Well,
They
it
had to.
seems pretty quick
Oh
actually,
yeah. So
process-wise.
well, like if he had gone in on a Wednesday or something, they probably would have done surgery the next day.
Really
Yeah,
interesting.
but
Okay.
because he had gone in on a Friday afternoon, they had Saturday, Sunday, which actually, I'm grateful for because we got to spend those 2 days with him. It
Mhm.
was hard, really hard, but we got to be with him. And I'll go back to this, but we talk about my family that we lost my dad twice. One
Mm,
was his diagnosis, and after his brain surgery, he was not the same person
I'm
ever again.
sure.
And
Yeah.
then we lost him like when he passed away. So we at least got those 2 days before to just kind of spend time together, pray, be together as a family,
Now
before
what
his
happened
surgery.
to him after the brain surgery?
So they ended up doing radiation for
Okay.
I think 6 weeks on his brain, which is not easy
Oh,
to do.
wow. No.
And then he did chemo for about, gosh, I don't even know how many months. It was several rounds of chemo, that made him very ill. And it was kind of just their standard of care. They didn't really have much to offer. So I have to say, we ended up not using the oncologist we met in the hospital. We transferred to a different oncologist because we just were not impressed with her. The first thing she said was, do you need an antidepressant? Do you want me to give you an antidepressant? And I'm sitting in the room. I'm like, he just had brain surgery. And she's like, you seem depressed. And I'm like, you just told him he has a like terminal brain cancer.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah. I mean, there was just a lot of things we were like, what's
I would
happening
have
right
been
now?
infuriated. I would have been like, if he's not depressed, something's wrong with his brain.
Right.
Like, what are you talking
Right.
about?
Like that seems to be like a normal
That's
response of like hearing news, like that.
oh my
And she
goodness.
just was kind of like, do you just want me to give you a pill for it? And I had asked
Ugh.
her just before that, like, could he take a probiotic? Because we were kind of like, what can he take while he's doing radiation and chemo
Yeah.
and all these things? She's like, oh no probiotics. That cannot mix with the steroids. And then in the next breath, she's recommending an antidepressant. And I'm sitting here like, but you can mix an antidepressant with steroids? Like,
Can
what's
he
happening?
could he eat yogurt?
According to her, apparently not.
Okay.
So we did not move forward with her. So that would be, that was one of my,
Oh my
that
gosh.
was like a light bulb moment for me
Yeah.
because, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us, and I don't fault anybody because I was there too, is we trust the experts. We trust, like that they know better. And we're not allowed to question because we didn't go to school, so we don't know. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me because I had done it in the past. I've had my own personal health issues. And that moment for me was very pivotal. I think that like spurred in me a little bit of a fire is like, okay, like I'm not seeing like this expert thing that they all say we're supposed to trust because like what's coming out right now is not making sense. Like it's just the like critical thinking in me like simply just was like this just isn't like all adding up. And so I'm not necessarily it's not that I didn't trust anybody to help my dad. Like he ended up getting a great oncologist and radiologist. His radiologist was amazing and so kind and
But
understanding. But
do you feel like because you're in one of those situations, and we know a lot of people who've been in these situations in the last few years, people that are facing cancer, especially the cancer treatment protocol,
right.
where it's like, and I think this is maybe a hard question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want
Okay.
to. But when you watch people go to the oncologist, to the doctor, and they're like, well, you probably only have whatever, 8 months to a year or whatever to live. And then we're going to torture you for that time period to see if we can squeak out an extra month or two.
Right.
And um, I mean, I don't know what to think about that process. I think people sometimes are saved, right? And so I think that's why they do it. But the number of people I've seen just be tortured for a year and then die, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard, and it
Oh,
makes you wonder, like, how have we not come up with something better? We have all of these other scientific advancements and developments. What are we missing, you know?
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, is that it was that's what I've observed in people's lives. We actually had just had a dear friend, an incredible man, pass away. Same process, same thing.
Mm.
Cancer, he had had cancer, it was in remission for a very long time. In the last few years, cancer came back, it was very aggressive. And then all the chemo, all the radiation, and he was nothing. Like, he was a frail, tiny person by the
Mm.
time he passed
Oh
away.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, I hate this,
Mm-hmm.
actually.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
it's miserable. Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to process because you're thinking like, this is what they're telling me could help me or my family member. So you don't want to skip out on
You're
it.
like, "It's worth a try,"
Right.
right? It's
Right. You're
worth a
like,
shot.
yeah. Yeah.
But then on
But
the other hand, it's like there's no quality of life in that
yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about this as a family. Just that God has numbered our days and there's
Mhm.
nothing any of us can do to change that number. Like
No.
that, we're in line, on our way to heaven as believers. And no matter how much research I did or how much, natural or other alternative treatments my dad added in to the chemo and radiation that other people maybe had success with, it wasn't going to change
It
his
didn't touch it,
days,
right? Yeah.
right? Yeah. But I do believe we have the ability to impact the quality of those days, right?
Yeah.
And um, one way or the other, we can make that quality really bad, or we can try to, it can be good, or a combination of both. But I think the hardest part that even for my dad was that he took the doctor's diagnosis and their assessment of his timeline, almost like they were God. I mean, and they pretty
Mm.
much, the way they presented it to us and to him was, there, you have 12 to 18 months. Like, there's no chance after that. Like, what we give you that isn't going to extend past that 12 to 18 months. Like, you'll be,
Oh.
oh
So,
yeah.
with your master's in counseling, what do you think of the psychology of that practice?
Oh, it's heartbreaking because it just, and for me to know, it's I can get a bit fiery about this, but I struggle with this idea that people can give other people um, a timeline or a deadline and say, like, well, because I know more because I went to school, or I've seen more, I've seen this happen. You haven't walked this road. I've had other patients, and this is, they're giving the average, and they're giving, like, well, this is what I've experienced, and they're pretty cold about it. Probably, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. It's probably because they've seen death a lot, maybe. And so they're not going to sugarcoat things. So I can see there's a fine balance.
I'm wondering though, psychologically, things can become self-fulfilling
Yeah,
prophecies with people. What you believe about yourself, you become.
yeah,
And so I think that's why God doesn't like the practice of divination and future telling in some ways, because you put that out there and then people start to believe it and then it becomes its own energy.
yeah,
And so I've always been curious about that whenever doctors do that. I'm like, isn't there another way you can break these really bad pieces of bad news, right? Isn't there another way we can approach this where it's like, I have no idea how many days you have,
yeah,
right? But you should live all of them to the fullest.
yeah.
I mean, isn't there a way to just reframe this and not give them this ultimatum of like, well, I hit the 12 months, you know?
I think as a believer, it's easy to say that because we have a hope, right? In the
Yeah.
end, um, we know where we're going to end up, and so we can, like, I think, process, like, oh yeah, let's make the best of the time we have. But
Mhm.
when we talk about the world and people who aren't believers and don't have that hope, um, I don't know if I don't know if they have the ability. Maybe they do, but, like, they're just not processing life in the same way that we view life.
They're not, but it's interesting. The Bible is so psychologically sound, right? And
Mhm.
hope is everything. I mean, there's been whole books written about who made it through, the Nazi camps. And the one thread that was with all the people that made it through the death camps tended to be that they had hope,
Yes.
you know? And
Absolutely.
it's psychologically sound. Like when you do that, you give people an extra bit of strength that they may not have had otherwise. To lose hope, if you lose hope, you lose your life anyways.
Right.
You're not living.
Hmm.
And so it is kind of a strange, I've always thought this. So I'm all about, we're kind of, um, I'm not an expert in any of this, but as like an average person who's had people pass away from cancer in her life, um, or pass away from really difficult situations, I think it's okay to kinda say the things that people are thinking out loud, just like
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
think this stuff.
Oh
They
yeah.
go through these processes and they're like, "Did you have to say that like that? Did you have to give him a timeline? Do we have to do this way? Is this the only" right? Like, people are asking these questions. Finally, I feel like, because for a lot of my growing up, I don't think people asked a lot of questions either. But I think now people are really going, "Wait a second. Maybe I want quality of life more than I want
Mm,
quantity of life, or maybe I
right.
want, something different." And I think your story really resonates for a lot of people because a lot of people have been in your shoes. And
Yeah. Sadly, too many.
so many
Yeah.
people have
It's,
been there.
I
And,
mean, talk about an epidemic.
yeah.
Cancer is just ravaging our
And it's
world.
it's up 11.3% apparently,
Mm,
year over year, since 2022 even, since they were looking. I just saw, I have to get the exact numbers, but just saw someone who's putting together some incredible statistics and numbers, and it's just skyrocketing, especially certain types of cancers right now. And so I think it's really important that we talk about, um, we might not have the cure to cancer. I wish we did.
Yeah, me too.
But
Me
we might
too.
have some awesome ways to prevent it and to keep that hope and to put our trust in the right place.
Hmm.
Um, I wanna talk to you about this actually. So I'm gonna s I sent you some questions. I'm gonna skip down a little bit. We'll jump around here. Um, so we were just kinda touching on this. What do you think the state of health in America is like right now? And with all your research that you've done in the last few years, where do you think we are?
Well, we're the most chronically sick nation than we've ever had.
Yeah.
And our kids, especially, are like severely chronically ill with
Yeah.
autoimmune or um, cancer. I mean, you name it. There's
Diabetes.
diabetes, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it is just the amount of kids that I see with allergies. Um, yeah, I mean, wearing a diabetes patch. Oh, it's crazy to me because I remember growing up as a child and I'm like, autism, ADHD, like there's just, there's so much um, that it's unfortunate because we have so many resources here, yet we're still so ill and unhealthy.
Yeah.
Um, I think people are starting to, the state of public health, just even in the last few years, it's been eye opening for a lot of people, I think. Um, Whether it's seeing how unhealthy we are. And I think I was reading something as well that the US had more deaths per capita. I could be totally saying this wrong, but then a lot of underdeveloped nations where they typically you would think they'd be more ill, they didn't have as many resources, but we had way more deaths. And why is that? Why are we not asking that question? We kind of just accepted it. Like, oh, we didn't stay inside long enough, or, like giving these reasons that aren't really adding up when you just sit back and like actually critically think about like, why are we so unhealthy here? And
Yeah.
it's really unfortunate, but it's where like I think going back to, I think the idea is like we've for so long outsourced our health to others. I mean, I see it in my grandparents' age, like they are it's so different how they view doctors and their health. Like the smallest thing happens and they're calling their doctor. And like whatever their doctor says,
Yep.
I'm doing it to a T. And
They
I'm
never
not,
ask
yeah,
any
no
questions.
questions. And it's
Which
like,
it's
oh,
weird.
yeah.
It's weird because
But
my grandma's the one that taught me to, like, question things,
uh
and then it's like that whole concept skipped a generation or something. Because like, yeah, I mean, my parents now question more, but they growing up, it was like, "Oh, you have a sniffle, we better call the doctor,"
yes,
and whatever
yes,
they say is the
yes.
accurate, conclusion.
It's
Yeah.
very interesting, yeah, to watch. I mean, my grandparents are, well, my dad's parents have passed away,
Mm.
but my mom's parents are, 87, 88, and they are, I mean, they have some health, definitely have had some health issues, but for being their age, they are pretty, like they get around.
That's
We just
awesome.
spent the weekend up with them in the mountains. But I also watch them when something happens, the first person they call is their doctor, and it's like the doctor's word is gold.
Yeah.
Like if anyone has anything else to say outside of it, it's like, well, I need to check with my doctor. um, and so yeah,
Yeah.
and I kind of watched that with my parents when they were going through this. I think they questioned a little bit more because they had us kids kind of like pushing and saying like, wait a second, what do you mean by that? And, oh, are you sure that's the only way? Or what about doing something different? Like, can we add this treatment in with what he's doing? And so I think they started like being a little bit more open to it. But I think if they didn't have us kids around, it was just my mom and dad walking this journey, they would have just taken the doctor's word and done
Mhm.
everything the doctor told them, whether they knew, even if it wasn't helping, they would have been like, well, that's what the doctor told us to do. Like,
Yes.
there, it's going to help because that's what the doctor
Yes.
said.
And I think it's a tough time for those folks because so many, there have been so many stories now that have come out about treatments, drugs, whatever, that were highly recommended or highly used or highly, prescribed, that have ended up being disasters. I think about
Hmm.
like OxyContin being one of
Yes.
them. You think about what they've discovered now with depression and
Oh, yeah.
the SSRI
Hmm.
drugs. And if y'all aren't aware, what they basically discovered is the original mechanism by which they thought depression was happening, right?
Right.
The whole foundation for the SSRI drugs, they found out was faulty. The
Yes.
studies were faulty. They were wrong. They didn't what they thought they had concluded wasn't actually the conclusion they should have come to. And so the entire foundation for antidepressant, a lot of the antidepressant drugs, is now gone,
Right.
and they don't even know if or why antidepressant drugs work. I mean, there are theories out there, right? Is this a placebo effect? Maybe they don't work at all, and we haven't studied them well enough. And
Right.
so all these things are coming out because they eventually do, right? Like, you can only lie for so long, and the truth always comes out. So even if it's a generation later, it'll come out. So all these things are coming out about these medications. Specifically, we've experienced in the last 3 years with the very, very poor product that COVID-19 vaccines were, that they didn't work. They didn't do anything we were told that they did, and they possibly have done damage. I think a lot of people, like, are starting to think, now what? Now what am I
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do? How am I supposed to be healthy? How do I even research? And there's a whole group, and I didn't ask you this. I didn't prep you for this question, but maybe you can speak to this. There's a lot of people out there who say that you have to be a doctor or an expert in the field in order to understand the information that's coming out. And I find this really interesting because it was all the doctors and experts that were telling us the wrong thing. So
Right.
I don't know, but I don't know what that means. But I want to speak to that a little bit because I think people think I'm not smart enough to understand what this stuff is. And for you, actually, there are some great books and stuff you can read, like how to read statistics. You
Hmm.
can learn how to read, medical studies. You can learn how to understand this data. You do have a brain. God gave it to you for a reason. You should use
Hmm.
it. But can you speak to that little accusation? It's a logical fallacy,
It is.
but it
I
comes
mean,
up
it's
all the time.
gaslighting. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a way to, make you not question or not speak up or not, say, this is
You're
seeming
not
off.
smart enough to
Yeah,
question
you don't
this,
know. You're not
right?
an expert, so don't broach this
Yes.
subject because if you do, you're probably going to get it wrong. And that, I think that's why we are in the place we're at is because, and I have been there. So I remember before my daddy got diagnosed, the year it was January, we were at church and they had asked everyone to write down one of your biggest fears. And the whole goal was like, we're going to really, pray and ask God to work on this fear because, God says over and over, do not fear, right, in
Right.
the Bible. And I remember one of my biggest fears, and my family and my friends can attest to this. I was scared of health issues, terrified.
Mm.
I was a hypochondriac growing up. Like I had a lot of things that I was worried. One about myself getting ill or sick or something happening to my family. And lo
Mm.
and behold, that year my dad got a brain tumor.
Oh, wow.
I look back now and I where I'm at now with my view of health is so much different. And I wouldn't say I have the fear that I did when, you know, 5 years ago.
Mm.
My mindset has changed. But I think fear plays a big part in this. Fear of, I'm going to get it wrong. Fear of, I won't know what they're talking about, or I don't understand. So I'm just going
Mm.
to trust someone else. And that outsourcing our health to someone else, whether it's the TV telling you, oh, you need this prescription
Right.
pill because you have these, symptoms, go tell your doctor and ask about this pill. So I'm going to trust the TV over my own God-given innate instincts and ability to, just look into things for
Yeah.
myself and my family. And I think that it's a way, I think, when they say like, oh yeah, trust experts, but not, they say that, but then some experts speak out and it's
Yeah.
different. And they're like, but not those
Trust
experts.
our
Yes,
experts.
not those
It's
experts.
governments have been doing this for a long time,
Yeah.
and corporations have been doing this for a long time. But I want to bring this back into kind of a spiritual context because I think about two aspects of this. One, this whole message of you're not smart enough to understand the message. People need to realize this is what the Catholic Church was doing to people before the
Mm-hmm.
Reformation. They were
Mm-hmm.
telling people they were too stupid to read their own Bibles and not to go take a look at it, that
Right.
they controlled the information and that you had to get your information from them. And really, anybody that starts to tell you that you're too dumb to understand and you shouldn't do your own research, boy, I would never trust one thing they're saying because they're probably trying to sell you something. I mean,
Yep.
honestly, there's no other reason to do that. You should allow your truth to stand the test of scrutiny because if
Mm-hmm.
it can't, then it's not the truth. Um, but I also think about, especially with medications and medicines and our food products and all of that
Oh
thing,
yeah.
the Bible does talk to what we put in our bodies. And Christians don't often understand this, but there are laws about how we treat seeds, what we do to plants, what we do to animals. God hates animal cruelty. He absolutely despises certain things going into human beings' bodies. And he says these things can defile you, they can harm you, they can cause you to not be spiritually aware. I mean, there's all sorts of things the rabbis believed about that stuff. There's a spiritual principle to paying attention to what you're doing with your body because your body does affect your mind and your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder kind of where do you land on that? What do you think some of the spiritual or biblical principles around that might look like?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about this. I think, I mean, we have the Bible for, a reason. It's
Yeah.
our foundation. And I think it's so key to our physical and mental and spiritual health. I mean, yeah, I think like you've said earlier, we sometimes think like, oh, spiritual is different than my physical or mental. And it's all like boxed up. Like I keep this file over here and,
Yeah.
but they are so intertwined. And the Bible gives us this guideline
Yeah.
for how to take care of all of them, like
Yeah.
as a whole. And God is, He created all of us physically, spiritually, mentally. And so I think, I just think about, I was just sorry, I'm looking down to pull up the verse that I
Yeah.
was thinking about. But just in Proverbs 3, how it talks about, my son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life many years and bring you prosperity. And then it goes on to say, this will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones.
Mm.
Um, and just how important it is that we know what God says and we walk alongside that. And going back to that, our body is a temple. I mean, he says
Yeah.
this, and we should treat it as a temple. And we've lost, I think, that we don't talk about that. They don't talk about it at church. You don't like, it's not like a typical Bible study you're going to go do. It'd be like, oh, what does it mean to treat my body as a temple? Um,
No.
and so we don't think about that in just our
But
everyday.
shouldn't it be, so I've started to think about this. If my first question is, how is this going to affect my ability to carry out my ministry?
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to look into certain things and what it can do to your mind, what it can do to your emotions, what it can do to your body, you're going to find a lot of this stuff could have a very negative impact on your ministry.
Yes.
Like the work that God needs you to have, the empathy and the presence and the mental stability and the physical wellness to do. And so when we treat our bodies like garbage, it's kind of that first checkpoint, that first check of like, do I care about what God made me to do?
Right. Right.
Do I care about this?
Or do I care
Because,
about
yeah.
what he gave me, what
Oh,
he's
yeah.
blessed me with? I mean, this body and this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're not gonna, and there's a lot of confusion around verses like, that talk about food, what goes into your mouth doesn't defile you and all of this stuff. We know just I'll just give a great example. I give this in my book. If you drink bleach, you're going to die. So
Yeah.
he wasn't talking about just anything. You can't
Right.
just put anything in your
Right.
mouth.
Right.
He's talking about the biblical definition of food, which you find in Leviticus. These things are food. These things are not food. There are certain things that are classified as not food. Do you know, you probably do know this, when you look up the ingredients of a lot of these medications and how they were developed, you are going to find things in there that are very much, I would just say they're not kosher. Um,
No.
they are very disturbing
Hmm.
ingredients
Very.
from animals and other things that you would go, I would never put that in my body if I knew that was an ingredient.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm
Hmm.
sure you've like, have you come across any egregious examples? Because I've come across a lot.
Am I allowed to say it? No.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
absolutely. Yes,
you
you
just
are.
go, you can go up. I mean, there are aborted fetal cells in
Yeah.
some medications.
Yep.
And people want to say like, oh, they want to, dissect it and say, well, it's not really, but it's
But it
in the,
is.
it is, and
That's what it came from. Yeah.
it's in the ingredient list. Like they're not hiding it.
Right.
You just have to look. But I think what I found when I talk to people about these things, one, they just simply don't know,
Yeah.
and two, I think part of it is like they don't want to know, because then if they do know, then they have to kind of have a tug and
Try.
pull about like, oh, is
Yeah.
this okay? Like, and
It makes life a little more
it
challenging
makes it
for sure.
challenging. And
Yeah.
when we go back to, the biggest obstacle as a human is our selfishness
Yeah.
and our wanting things to be easy, or for me, or I want to fulfill myself. So, a lot of times we're not asking that question that you said, like, how does this affect or how is this going to impact my ministry? We're asking, how does this affect me?
Yeah.
I really want that, Diet Coke, and it
Yeah.
makes me feel good in the moment.
Right.
I'm not going to think about that there are like legit articles, scientific articles that say they've linked aspartame to brain cancer,
Right.
but I'm still going to go drink that Diet Coke because it makes me feel good and I need it. I deserve it. I had a rough week. And
Right.
that Diet Coke just really tastes good.
Diet Coke is like
It
the maybe even like that's like low level.
is low level, but
That's low level.
you could
Yeah.
take it to, all, you
But
could
you
apply it
but
to
you
a lot
go
of things.
all the way up the ladder.
Hmm.
I mean, people do all sorts of drugs for the
Oh yeah.
same reasons.
Yeah.
And you're right, you can't take that approach. That can't be your reason at all times for the choices you're making about your health. It cannot be, "Well, I need it right now, it feels good."
Right.
That's always gonna go poorly, right? That's gonna
Or,
take you
yeah,
in
I
a
think,
bad direction.
yeah. And I think the other thing that we find is it's easy,
Yeah,
taking a pill that my doctor gave me because I'm not sleeping good is the easy thing to do. And it may help short term, it may help long term, or it may help a little bit or a lot. It's different for every person. Um, but it's the easy thing to do. It's
yeah,
harder to say what's the root cause of why I'm not sleeping,
yeah,
and is there, can I look at my eating habits or my mental health, or any other thing that may be going on, and address that. But it might take longer. It may not fix it
yeah.
tonight when I'm going to bed. um,
Or it might be that that's the only time of day God can get a hold of you, and you need to get up and pray.
True,
That's
true.
happened to me,
I've had
before.
that.
I'm like, "Why
I've had
can't I
that.
sleep? I need my
Yeah.
sleep," and then finally I was like,
Oh
I haven't
God.
really been spending a lot of time with the Lord
Yeah.
lately. Maybe he's trying to get a hold of me. Maybe I need to
Yeah.
go pray for some people that he's been putting on my heart that I haven't spent the time, to pray for."
Hmm.
I mean, you don't know why, but if you like you said, if you just pop a pill, if you think that that is the ultimate way to fix your emotional and physical problems, I think you're gonna discover what, we've discovered, which is that it doesn't fix them long term. And you still have to deal. I think the depression issue is a great one. There are good reasons to feel depressed for an
Oh,
amount of time.
absolutely.
It's
Hmm.
okay. It's okay if you are feeling really down, it might be that there's something you've got to work through. You have
Mhm.
to work through it. You are being forced to face it. And we've got to, as a society, be okay with that. Like,
Right.
you don't just pop a pill and fix depression. That's not how
No.
that works. Now, some people, yeah, I get it. They need some sort of extra help to feel normal. I completely understand why some people do it. But for the vast majority of, I mean, how many people did we figure out with this SSRI thing? How many people are on antidepressants? It's like it's some extraordinary amount. It's like,
Oh, well, and kids, they
right,
have
and
kids on
kids.
it. Yeah. I mean, little
Yeah,
children that, yeah, this whole idea that your brain just isn't producing the right amount of serotonin and we can fix this chemistry, yeah, that they're now finding was not
not
true. It's
correct.
false. And it's the
And it
whole
has
premise.
nothing to do with serotonin levels.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, it's scary, isn't it? And how many
Hmm.
people have become addicted to those things and now their brains don't produce the right amount of
Right.
whatever because they became dependent on the drug to do it for them. And
Right.
now it's going to be that much harder to backtrack and work. Anyways, we could go off
Hmm.
like this forever. I do want to keep talking about a couple things here. Okay. So, let's move on to, and I wish we had more time for this question, but I want to talk about this because this is a part of my series that I'm doing. Let's talk about the lockdowns and mandates, what you chose, why you chose what you chose, because you chose a very specific direction. You were very outspoken and very brave in that time period, I thought. And I'm sure you got censored a lot. So maybe
I
describe your
still am.
experience.
I'm still censored.
Yeah. Well, you're on the list. You're on lists all over the place,
I am. I'm
probably.
on I'm on a bunch of government lists, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
you're on the list.
They're always listening to me. No. This is so interesting because I I for some reason, and I can only explain that I think it was God. Just for some reason in my spirit from the very beginning, I had this um instinct that what they were telling us wasn't the whole truth.
Mm,
And I was watching, I remember sitting on my couch one day watching President Trump, talking about this whole idea that they were presenting of 2 weeks to slow the spread. And I remember looking at my husband being like, they cannot do that. It will never end. It will not just be 2 weeks. And I actually even called our county commissioner at the time in Jeffco that I knew was someone I knew. And I called her and I said, you cannot do this. Like
yeah.
this will put us on a very bad path. Um, it will turn into a month and then it'll turn to several months. And I remember people looking at me and even them telling me on the phone, like, you don't understand. Again, the whole idea of like you need to trust us.
You're
Like
not smart
we
enough.
have more info than you do,
Yeah.
and you don't get it. But I don't know. I felt this urge, and one thing I want to bring up is growing up, I was so quiet,
Mm,
very shy. I was not one to speak up ever.
mm.
So this was a new thing for me, but I felt so passionate about it that I just felt like we're not getting the whole truth. And
You know,
um,
I had I'll tell you this, I had the same experience. I was sitting at the table with my family, and they had just announced the 2 weeks to slow the spread, and I think my dad said something like, "They better keep it to 2 weeks because if they don't, they're gonna destroy the economy."
mhm,
And I looked straight at my dad, and I don't know where this came from, and I said, "This is gonna last as long as they possibly can make it last." And he was like, "They can't." And I said, "They're going to."
yeah,
And and then I was like, "Why did I say that?
yeah,
Why?" I didn't know why I thought that, but I was like I really did. I had the same gut instinct. I was like,
hmm,
"This is not gonna be 2 weeks. This is gonna be as long as they can possibly drag this out
hmm,
for whatever reason." Yeah.
yeah. And I did go protest down at the Capitol after it had been 4 weeks to slow the spread, um, and I got a lot of flack for that.
Yeah,
Meaning,
sure.
my a lot of people that I grew up with or had been gone to college with or high school, and they saw, I think what it was a shock for them to see how outspoken I had been, on
Yeah.
social media or just in general. I think they were like, who is this person? Like, she never spoke like in college. Like, what is she doing now? And so I think it was a shock for them, but also like, a lot of people didn't agree and they wanted us to, that whole idea of like, we're in this together, stay home, stay safe. That just did not resonate with me. And I can only explain it as like, it was God's wisdom. And I think I've had some experiences through my dad and just me, my own personal health and with my kids and their health. I've had some times where I had a really strong instinct, like that gut instinct, like that I sometimes call it like that mom instinct too
Mhm.
with your kids, where I didn't follow it. And I look back now and I'm like, I should
And
have
you wish
followed
you
it.
had.
I wish I had, and
Yeah.
I should have. And I knew in my spirit, I think that was God speaking. Like that was so strong in my spirit, but I kind of like pushed it down. And I
Yeah.
was like, no, I'm going to trust what I'm hearing over here.
Whoever,
Yeah. What
yes.
they're telling me, they know better. Like, that whole idea of like, I don't know what I'm talking about. So that's probably nothing. I need to just ignore it. And I look back a lot from what I know now. And I'm like, so I think I've had some of those experiences. And when this came around with COVID and the lockdowns, and I was like, I had that in my spirit. Like, this is not the whole truth. And this is not the right way to approach it. And I just knew that
Yeah.
I'm not going to ignore this.
It feels like to me that God was and is preparing you for your role
Mm,
as being an advocate on behalf of others, because that time period was an attack on our mental, physical, spiritual health. It was an attack on 100% of you as a person.
mm-hmm,
It was
mm-hmm.
isolating, it
Yep.
was scary, it was fear-mongering,
Fear. Oh, the fear.
it was,
Mm-hmm.
it was constantly like you could die. This message, like you could get sick and die, was
Or you could
pervasive,
kill your grandma.
or you could kill someone else.
Mm-hmm.
It was the most psychologically damaging, sick, and we've seen the outcome of this. It
Yeah.
has been mental and physical illness for so many more people that would never have had these issues. It has been, skyrocketing suicide rates in
Yeah.
young people. It has been so bad for society, and it was constant. And so I do think that God was raising up people, um, and people even in the medical industry, to
Oh,
be
yeah, absolutely.
advocates on behalf of people, to be good advocates. And it feels like maybe that time period was preparation for you, um, for what you're stepping into.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's helped shaped, I think, my what I see, moving forward and how I think I want God to use me, or
Mm.
what I feel like he's calling me to. I'm still, I haven't got it all like planned out or figured it out, but I just feel this calling of like, yeah, I think people don't have one thing I've learned, is that you're never going to be, no one is going to be the biggest advocate for you or your
Yeah.
family than you are. Right. So like that doctor, he's got 100 other patients, and yeah, he might care. I don't doubt that people that have gone into the medical field care and they want to help people. My
Yeah.
brother just, graduated from med school,
Yes.
and he has a heart of gold. He wants to help people so badly. And that's why he feels called to do. And so I don't doubt that, people in the medical field want to be helpful, and that's what they wanted to do. But I think, we they're not going to be your biggest advocate. They just can't. Like, they have so much other
Yeah.
things and
They don't have
people and
time. Yeah.
right, yeah,
Right.
and you for yourself are your biggest advocate and for
Yeah.
your family. And if you don't take that role on, then you don't have an advocate, really.
Right.
I mean, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, and the importance
Mm.
of advocating for yourself, and that you don't have to take everything at face value. Um, we forget that we pay our providers, whether it's healthcare or mental health, or a dentist, like
Yeah.
I've had to say like, oh, this dentist isn't working for me and my kids right now.
Right.
I'm not obliged to continue. Like
Right.
I'm paying you. Like
That's right.
you're not paying me to stay with you. Like that would
That's
be great if
right.
you did, but
Pay a
so it's
lot of money for
okay.
all of this,
It's
really.
okay if I need to find someone that aligns with, what I'm looking for or is open to me asking questions or advocating for my own health.
Yes, and I think I've learned this just experientially as well. I had a few years back, an obvious skin cancer on my leg, and, it was just doing crazy things, and I knew what it was. My mom had had skin cancer, and we'd done lots of research on the different types when I was younger, and I was like, "Well, I know what they're gonna recommend, I know what they're gonna do if I go in, and I know how much it's gonna cost me." And I was
Right,
like,
right.
"I'd like
Yeah.
to find an alternative first."
Right,
And
right.
you know what? I found something. It was a cream. It was probably 1/15th of the cost of what I would have paid,
Mhm.
to have this thing worked on, by a dermatologist. I used this cream for about 6 weeks. The entire situation went away, and I went in to a dermatologist, and I forced them to biopsy it and test it to make sure.
Mhm.
And sure enough, all that was left was scar tissue. And
Mhm.
I thought, "Oh my gosh." I literally spent just like the smallest portion of what I would have spent had I gone in. Now, I'm not recommending that people do this, okay? I just knew I was gonna do this. This is who I am.
Sure.
I take risks with myself. I won't take risks with you. You make your own
Yeah.
choices.
Yeah.
But I learned, I was like, "Huh." So there are things out there that and when I this was interesting. When I told my dermatologist about this product, he had never heard of it.
Yeah.
He had no idea what I was talking about.
Mhm.
And I was like, "You've never heard of this? This has been around since, like, the '70s."
Yeah. Isn't it kind of mind blowing?
It's
We had
mind-blowing.
we had that
Yeah.
with my dad's oncologist, his second one, but I brought in some actual scientific articles on a off-label prescription drug that was being used for brain cancer or had
Mm,
been used in in combination with uh, the chemotherapy that they were giving him. And he had never seen it before. He
yeah.
had never seen the study. It
Yeah.
was a very well-known journal article. And when I provided it to him, he was blown away. He was
Yeah.
like, where did you find this? Like, I've never even knew about this. And yeah, let's go ahead and let's try it. He
Yeah.
wrote the prescription, which it was a very expensive drug. So that
Mm.
was a God thing as well. Like just like him
Isn't that
he
isn't that interesting that you are actually when you advocate for yourself, sometimes you bring information to them
yes, yes.
that they can help other patients with.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he read the article. He was like, "Send this to me. I want to dig into it." But I think in America, at least, I think we assume
Yeah.
these doctors are keeping up on all the latest and greatest research. They know, and they're giving me the best of the best.
If
And
you have
that's
100
not true.
patients, you don't have time to research
No, they
anything.
don't have time.
That's
And
right.
they're
Yeah.
just trusting like what the person above them told them. Like, this is what we do. This is our standard of
Yeah.
care. And the standard of care for cancer hasn't changed in like 50 years. It's the same
Right.
thing they've been doing 50 years ago. I mean, nothing's
Right.
changed. We have alternative like science,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
we're not using
that's
it.
exactly what I discovered with the skin cancer thing.
Right.
Started to look into it, and I was like, "This is all the stuff they did with my mom 20 years ago."
Yeah.
It just costs more now,
Yep.
but it's the same exact
Yeah,
thing.
money, follow that money.
Our conversation so far, what I hope this is doing is encouraging people to be thoughtful about what happens with your body
Hmm.
because it does affect your mind, it does affect your spirit, to not be afraid to pray about the medical choices you're making before
Right.
you just trust, and to look
Hmm.
for answers because God does sometimes provide answers that you never would have found otherwise if you didn't
Absolutely.
ask Him.
Hmm.
And that the Bible talks about how to treat your body. The Bible really cares about that. But I want to get some specifics from you before you go. So, I
Okay.
would love to hear, with all of your experience, your top 5 pieces of advice you would give people today to naturally improve your quality of health and life.
So, okay, I have lots, but so it's hard to narrow down.
Yes.
I would say first and foremost, I wrote these down. Let me just grab them really quick. Um, was to not fear. I think fear is our biggest. enemy
Amen.
in this realm, right?
Yep.
In general for everything, but especially with health, like don't fear that you can ask a question. Don't fear the diagnosis. Don't fear learning. I
Yeah.
think we feel like, oh, there's so much research out there. I don't even know where to start. And you don't have to know it all, but you can start somewhere and you take little bits and pieces. And when you take out fear, you're empowered, I think,
Yep.
to say, like, I can take charge here a little bit and I can work with my medical providers, whoever they may be, whether it's a
Mhm.
naturopath, Western medical doctor, or all of the above, a chiropractor, and just looking at like, I can do this because God has given me a brain. That's my biggest thing. I'm like, we all have brains. We all can use them. You don't have to go to a school to be able to like use your brain.
Yeah.
It's just not true. So that was my one thing. And then going along with that was to trust your God given instinct.
Mm.
Um, I was interviewed for so my fourth baby. I was going to do a home birth. So my first three, I was induced for several different reasons,
Mm.
all across the board. And my fourth, I was like, I am not getting induced this time. And this was right after COVID. So again, you're kind of like, I don't know if I necessarily trust what's going on in the hospital. I don't know what's going to
Right.
happen. I don't even know if my husband's going to be able to be in a hospital with me at this point.
Right.
So I had chose to go down a path with a midwife on home birth. And lo and behold, I ended up getting induced for other reasons, which is fine. I am grateful for the medical
Yeah.
community and what we have available to us. I
Yeah.
would never like say, don't ever go to a hospital or don't trust any
Right.
doctor. I would never
No.
say that.
No.
Um, but I remember doing an interview on 9 News actually, because my previous midwife was shocked. She's like, why are you doing a home birth? And she said that at that time, this was 2022, so a year ago, um, she said the amount of patients they were losing at her OB office was like 80% because they were all doing home births.
Oh, wow.
And she was like, I don't understand. Why are all these women choosing home births? Like
Mm.
this is like crazy. We've never seen this before. And so her and I were interviewed on 9 News just about this whole idea of like why this has increased in the last couple of years. And my number one thing was like, listen, I think God has created us and our bodies to work in a perfect way. We live in an
Yeah.
imperfect world, right? So it's not always going to work perfectly, but he's given us these instincts for a reason. He works through them. And I think it's so important to listen to them,
Yes. Yep.
especially as mothers, because I think God just gives mothers just that a little, just extra instinct there.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yes.
but we think like, oh, I'm just not going to listen to it. I don't really know what I'm talking about. So that was my big thing.
Mhm.
Trust your God given instinct. The advocacy, like no one will advocate for you like you will for yourself or your family. So be an advocate. And what that may look different for everyone. For me, it was like, I'm going to dig in and I'm going to learn about. So they may tell me my dad needs to do this treatment. I'm going to learn about it. I'm going to find out everything I can, the good, the bad, the risks, the benefits, and what other alternatives there are, whether they work
Yeah.
together or we do them separately, just being an advocate for yourself and not
Mm.
just trusting anyone but yourself. I think we
Right.
tend to do that. And then I'm a very, I think there's a lot out there, so that can be intimidating, like from the natural world and the Western, medicine. Like there's so much. You're like, where do I even start?
Right.
I think it's important to kind of remember there's not like the one thing that's going to be the cure all.
Mm.
Or, people will say that, oh, I started using this one thing and it changed my life. And, I think sometimes you have to remember that even if it's a good thing, too much of a good thing isn't necessarily always good.
I was gonna say thank you for saying that because I do think that's something people are like, Oh, this really worked for me. It might not work for you. Number one, people's biology is different.
It
Sometimes
is.
things are just
Yeah.
different. And then you also have the snake oil salesman out
Mhm.
there big time right now. Like, this is the way to go. This is
Yeah.
going to be the cure. This is blah, 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 blah. Um, just like with cancer, they can
Yeah.
say that they can cure cancer with some of these treatments, but it doesn't work for everybody. And it
Right.
isn't, across the board. And so
Yeah.
that's not
Nothing
how
is
this
like
works.
100%. Nothing
Yeah.
is gonna 100% work or work 100% of the time for everyone. So everyone is different. And so I try to balance. I try to say like there's a balance, and that kind of goes into my last thing is like take the 80-20. Like if you're doing things for your health, like you're never going to do it perfectly. And I think we can beat ourselves up. I do that sometimes with me, like, oh, my kids drank, that soda tonight at the movie with my mom. And now I'm like, oh, they shouldn't have been having all that sugar. But like that 80-20 of like, you know what, they're going to be okay. Because 80% of the time they're drinking water or, having their vegetables. And I'm not going to get it perfect and they're not going to. And I'm not going to like simmer on it and let it ruin my mental health that we didn't do things like 100% of the way. I think when you get into the crunchy world, they like to call it, of like, oh, we have to have everything clean in our house, and I can't cook with this pan. It just I think you have to have a healthy balance and realize like we live in an imperfect world, and I'm going to do the best I can, and
Yeah.
I'm going to treat my body as a temple in the best way possible, and I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm going to try better next time, and
You're doing your best.
yeah.
So and I think God gives so much grace for that, and he doesn't want you to be obsessed with this either.
Right.
That becomes like a waste of time, right?
Yes.
It becomes like an obsession, and it becomes a god in a way that you don't want it to.
Absolutely.
And I think a
Hmm.
lot of people then end up in well, your first point was in fear
Yeah.
around things, and
Yes, it's a
you don't wanna
different
do that.
fear, right? It's,
Yeah.
well, now I'm fear of this, of getting a
Now I'm
medication.
afraid of
Oh,
sugar,
yes.
or whatever, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, that's not really the point,
Yeah.
but we tend to be an excessive society, so we do things to excess, so we have to, like,
Hmm.
pull that back and be
Yeah.
like, nothing in excess, like, we need to
Right.
pull it all back, even, like,
Right.
our super healthy adventures, can
Yes,
be excessive, so
it can.
yeah, yeah,
And I think the last thing too for me, which is really the last few years, I think, since COVID, and everyone's on social media and there's Google and there's all these search engines, and you can find an answer to anything. If you're looking for an answer, you'll find it. So you just have to have ask God for wisdom and discernment. I think is really important, and really to be careful about, because I think we're seeing, what I'm seeing in the health world is, especially the alternative more natural approach, is a lot of new age practices coming in, and this idea of like becoming one with yourself, and there's a lot of different like new things that are coming out that are like, oh, this is going to heal you, and it's been suppressed for so long. And yeah, maybe there are things that are helpful, but we have to really look at everything through the lens of the Bible, and have discernment, because you can easily in health or anywhere be sucked in, and then it becomes, like you said, a god, and it's not the God that we serve. And so I think that's been on my heart lately, just for myself, is to be really careful about the things that I am researching, and like asking God for wisdom in that, like, hey, are these things, they have really good positive things that they say about this, but is this something that, you know, comes from you? So,
yeah, and I really love that, that's a really good piece of advice as well, just given, well, I feel like I've learned to trust the Lord and his word more over the last few years in regards to how we're supposed to treat our bodies. I think, if You have people coming in.
I have people
I've got
coming
people
in.
too.
Right.
We're almost done. But I think just knowing that, the stuff that was in some of these drugs that they put out into the population don't align with biblical principles, you would have already known not to take them, right? You would have already known. All you had to
Right.
do was read the Bible.
Right.
And so when you see some of these practices that seem kind of weird, you can usually go back and find them in ancient civilizations and
Mhm.
figure out which God they're attached to, right?
Right.
And then you go,
Right.
oh, that's not my God. That's a different God.
Right.
So, all right. Well, Ashlie, thank you. I'm going to let you get to your family. I think my
Thank
daughter's playing
you.
piano right now. um, but thank you so much. This has been
Of
just
course.
awesome. And I'll have to have you back.
Yes, anytime. I love it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ashlie.
See
Bye.
ya.